Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Tell you how much I don't like black and white stuff. The most interesting conversations we have are in the grey areas. There's no point having a mind if you never change it. Nuance, intelligence, all of these things that are desperately running out of fashion. Today at 12 o'clock we're going to touch the topic that I think sums up that position better than any other we ever discuss. Everything that I would describe as intellectual should see me repelled by the topic we're about to discuss. The men we will meet later today are pretty close to heroes in my view. I'm not used to suffering cognitive dissonance, but when I tell you that we're going to have an exclusive encounter with two of the people who have dedicated their lives pretty much to tracking down child abusers, potential child abusers and paedophiles on the internet and then handing them over to the police, you'll understand why I describe it as a grey area. That's coming up at 12. At 11, oddly, the fact that I've had to take a little bit of time off work lately for health reasons, just to have my eye looked at appointments that can only be done in the morning, and that means I don't get paid. And please put your violin back in its box. I'm fine. But it made me realise that if I was, close to the breadline, if I was living in circumstances where missing a day's wage, or actually I think I've missed three days here and another job elsewhere, which adds up to a chunk of change, that I can afford. What if I was working close to the bone? What if I was actually, spent a little bit more at the end of the month when I'd met all my bills and outgoings, and then fell ill, had to go to a medical appointment, had to have a day off work. Why are we talking about that? Because the numbers of people on 0 hours contracts are rocketing. The latest figures published, give cause for concern, genuine concern. I'll find out whether or not I'm being a little bit soppy when I imagine what it would be like to be different from me, and suspect that the suffering is pretty acute and underreported. But we're going to begin with something that actually, in many ways, it just sums everything up post-referendum, post-Brexit. It sums everything up. People who voted to leave are utterly persuaded now that anyone, it's almost impossible to believe the mental acrobatics involved in arriving at this position. But of course, if you're starting from a position of cognitive dissonance, if you've got a position you haven't been reasoned into, no one's going to be able to reason you out of it. So one of the reasons why the Remain campaign spoke about expats working abroad in the run-up to the referendum vote was because they feared that there would be instability and uncertainty regarding their futures, especially because the Leave campaign, large elements of it, by no means all. Every time I say that, I know I'm wasting my breath. I'll still get bombarded with emails saying, why are you calling all Leavers racist? By no means all, but large swathes of the Leave campaign were so utterly obsessed with foreigners, whether they're speaking on trains, and immigration, regardless of whether or not there was proper evidence to back it up, that the Remain campaign knew full well that the future of people would remain a very live and potentially toxic issue, whatever the result of the referendum was. But the argument was pretty plain. If you vote to leave, then 1 million plus British people living abroad, immigrants, if you will, if you're looking at them from the country that they currently live in, expats, if you're looking at them from the country which they left. It's an interesting distinction that. We never call them immigrants, but it's not quite as politically loaded as some people like to think. They're not immigrants because they're British. So from our point of view, they're expats. But from a Polish point of view or a German point of view, of course, they are immigrants. And they don't know what their future looks like. And I hesitate to use the word we, because it seems a little bit partisan, but I'm going to. We told you, we said that this is one of the things we should be worried about. And that was filed under Project Fear. And that was filed under they need us more than we need them. Don't worry about it. There's no way anything bad will happen. I still don't think anything bad will happen. But what I find absolutely emblematic of the hypocrisy and dishonesty that now sweeps the country every time anybody puts their hand up and says, excuse me, can we just clarify something, please? Or is it possible that... that you actually don't know what you're doing, or Mum, Why has the emperor not got any clothes on? Shut them down! Traitors! Enemies of the people! Shut them up! Take them away! Every single time you point out something that is anomalous or dishonest or problematical, that's it. Boom, shut up. Shut up, shut up, shut up. Take his microphone away. Sack him. Stone her. You know what I describe. Even a former prime minister can be described in the Daily Mail as treacherous. A former Conservative prime minister, I should add. And now look what's happening. So people... And I will add like me at this point, because there's no point me asking you to expose yourself on the radio if I'm not prepared to do the same. People like me think Theresa May should act immediately to safeguard the future of our friends and neighbours who... Do you know, I was at primary school, at my kid's school earlier this week, and I don't know if they keep these numbers. I wouldn't necessarily want them to because of the sinister subtext, but I reckon well over half of the kids at my children's primary school have at least one parent from another European Union country. French, Italian, Polish, the Portuguese, an incredible gamut of people, none of whom now know for sure, marital status and things like that, they won't all be up in the air, but none of them now know for sure what the future is going to hold. And I believe that our Prime Minister should do the decent thing and actually not worry at this point about what happens next. Just act immediately to safeguard the interests of people who do all the things that they were told they had to do in order not to be the victims of discrimination and racism. You know, they do all the things that the people claiming not to be racist told them they had to do in order to be immune from accusations of racism or instances of discrimination. They pay taxes, they work, they are law-abiding, they go about their business in a peaceable and civilised fashion. They seek to make life and put down roots in this country. They actively want their children to be educated in British schools in a way that many British people don't. They have done everything they were supposed to do, and their future is in turmoil. And they are our neighbours and our friends, our family members, our loved ones, and they don't know what the future holds. And I hadn't realised, I'm sorry, I hadn't realised just how much turmoil and confusion there is out there. We touched on it a couple of weeks ago, and my inbox went berserk. We're hearing stories of people who've been here for 30 years. 30 years, now fearful that they won't be able to stay. People that have really known no other home, now fearful that they won't be able to stay here. And there is evidence that confirms their fears, with the residency rules being quite opaque and a little bit unfair, and also simply applying for residency in this country is approximately 17 times harder than it is in, for example, a country like Germany. So our Prime Minister should act to protect our taxpayers, the British resident taxpayer, regardless of where they were born or what is written on their passport. That seems to me to be the very point of politics. What Theresa May has elected to do is to draw a fat red line down this country, on one side of which 3 million law-abiding workers are rendered second class. Now, the argument has become, weirdly, the argument became over the course of the last week, when this story really got legs, when this story really gathered momentum, the argument has become that people who say what I just said don't care about British people working abroad. Remoaners. Oh, these Remoaners don't care about Brits working abroad. Hang on a minute. Every single person who voted to remain in the European Union voted to protect the stability and the security of every single British person living and or working elsewhere in the European Union. Every single Remain vote cast was cast, intentionally or not, to protect every single British person living on the Costa del Sol, every single British person living in Germany, every single British person living in France. Stability and security, or if you want a slightly less positive description, the status quo. The status quo left them safe and secure. Every single Remain vote spoke to that safety and security, spoke to that status quo. So even by the standards of dishonesty, deception and disgusting tactics now employed by people beginning to realise that they've possibly bitten off more than they can chew, or probably made a terrible mistake, the acrobatics they undergo to justify their decision and silent dissent have now created a scenario in which people who voted to throw expats' lives into turmoil, people who deliberately and consciously cast cast a vote that they knew, because they were told often enough, would leave British people on the Costa del Sol, would leave British people in Germany, and would leave British people everywhere else in the European Union facing confusion, definitely, turmoil, probably, and expulsion, possibly, but I still don't think so. Every single person who voted to leave voted to throw their lives into potential confusion. And they are now turning around, and again, it's not all of them by any stretch of the imagination, but what you might call the surprisingly large lunatic fringe on that side of the argument, they're now turning around and claiming they care more. Remoaners don't care about Brits abroad. Remoaners voted to look after them. You irredeemable prunes. Remoaners voted to look after them. You voted to throw them under a bus with 350 million quid written on the side in lies as big as they come. That's a description of fact, circumstance, evidence. Everybody who voted to leave voted to create a scenario in which British expats working abroad would at best be confused and at worst be deported. So please, don't insult yourself, your own intelligence, let alone mine, by claiming that somehow people saying that we should act now to protect our friends and neighbours in Britain in a way that should be utterly independent of the bigger picture is in any way evidence that people who voted to remain care less for Brits abroad than they do for their friends and neighbours here, regardless of where they may have been born. So that's me, right? And you can tell it's something I feel quite passionate about, because this rhetoric now that I told you was going to happen, but I didn't think it was going to happen quite this quickly. The way that arguments made by adults have now become, I know you are, but what am I? Like fascist. You know what a fascist is. And yet now apparently there's such a thing as liberal fascist. I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I? And the argument that racist people make, well, you're a racist, you're anti-British. All of British politics, it sometimes feels, is boiled down to adults on the wrong side of history shouting out, I know you are, but what am I? You get it in America, fake news. People who print lies going after journalists who print the truth, but if you don't like the truth, you call it fake news. I know you are, but what am I? And that's where we are. So why do you think, or what do you think, Theresa May should do? Just say it. Just say every single European Union resident who came here before, set a date, before Article 50 was triggered, every single one of you is welcome, as long as you continue to abide by the rules that everybody else has to live by. And if, in the highly, highly unlikely event of European Union countries responding in a negative fashion further down the line, we not only have the moral high ground, but we also have the political clout to argue and fight to protect our citizens living in other countries. But it confounds me, absolutely confounds me, that we won't do this as a country. And I can't see any real rationale for it except pandering to that nativist, I won't say racist, I'll say nativist, thinking that two people should be treated differently according to where they were born. Yeah, all right, it is racist. Actually and actively treated differently. So here is a useless oaf who happened to have been born in Birmingham, and here's a flipping genius who was born in Barcelona, and we should give the useless oaf some form of hierarchical supremacy, some form of superiority over the Spanish genius. It's nuts. It's a passport to political and economic oblivion. But as long as it's the right colour, loads of people will be happy to have that passport in their pocket. So, come on. Can we all agree on this? Just do the decent thing by our children's classmates, by our colleagues, by our friends, by our neighbours, by our loved ones. This is Britain, it's still your home, and whatever other European countries may do, it will remain your home because you are valued and cherished and welcome. And everyone on the Leave side who tells me they're not remotely racist and not remotely bothered by some of the nonsense about immigration, every single one of them should agree with that. And the only people who wouldn't agree with it are the people who genuinely do want people to be treated differently on their own street and in their own child's school according to the country they were born in. And there's a word for that. It's 10:17. And this is lovely. Hi, James. I voted for Brexit, and I'd do the same today if given the chance, but I think Theresa May should guarantee the status of the EU immigrants in the United Kingdom. If she does that, it would make the case for Brexit even stronger. And here's the line. This is from Ilya in Enfield. It would show that we are not the same as the bureaucratic politicians in Europe, and that's one more reason for us to want to get out of Europe. We won't play political games with people's lives. Sadly, we are. So I don't necessarily agree with your analysis. I didn't vote in the same way that you did, but what a beautiful way of putting it. It would show that we won't play political games with these people's lives, but we are. From the other side of the argument, I love you. Thank you so much for that. I've been trying to make this argument myself for well over a year, trying to convince my friends and family to vote Remain, and then since trying to reassure my friends and colleagues that they're still welcome here no matter what. I'm just not as articulate as you, so thank you, you're a star. And one more, oh dear, JOB is off again, howling at the moon, diatribe shouting at the radio. Mate, I've got the microphone. You're the one shouting at the radio, but oh, never mind. Jamie's in Chester. Jamie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I wanted to give an example of how this has played out practically in a family where I'm British and my wife is Dutch. I've spoken to you about her recently, actually. Yes. I wanted to start by saying that this position that the government is adopting, saying that they will guarantee the rights, but they want to wait for the EU to reciprocate, is inherently contradictory. Because if they are saying that they are going to guarantee the rights in any event, they have no leverage for the negotiations. The reality is if they're using it as a bargaining position... Which
they clearly are, because there has to be in brackets after what you've just said, unless, of course, you don't act in the way that we feel you should, and then we'll come down to your level.
Well, exactly. To have a bargaining position, there must be a chance that if the EU say no, we say no as well. Otherwise, you don't have a bargaining position.
Of course.
And as unlikely as that is, and I don't think it will happen, it is a possibility. And that is what is causing this uncertainty and turmoil in these families. Now, that was the position that my wife and I, took up. We don't think there will be a problem, but we can't take that chance. We have our life here, we have our daughter here, we work here. We can't take the chance that for whatever reason she's not going to be allowed to stay. So we decided to make this application for permanent residency. Now, I'm a barrister. I'm used to convoluted documents.
Are you an enemy of the people? What kind of lawyer are you? An enemy of the people type lawyer, or the other kind?
Are we not all enemy of the people? I'm not really.
We are now. Yeah, carry
on. That document is extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. There's a few problems with it. Even in the information it provides, most people will not be able to provide it that it demands. So my wife has been here since she was at university in 2003. This document requires her to put on it every occasion of which she's left the country between then and now. We figured out...
Well, forgive me, Jamie, for dragging up your dirty laundry live on the radio, but even a sort of dirty weekend in Dieppe, that would have to be down there as well.
Yeah, every time you've left the country, it demands dates. So we've been back to the Netherlands at least 3 times a year. We've estimated, and it is only an estimate, we can't do any more than that it's about 60 occasions since 2003.
Yowzers.
And it demands those dates. Well, that's just impossible. We can't provide that information. The other thing it wants is every occasion on which she's worked, it wants pay slips as part of the documentation. Now, she's currently self-employed, so she can provide accounts and such. But 8 years ago, she was a languages teacher in a school. She doesn't have pay slips for that. She doesn't have them anymore, but that is required documentation.
And in the absence of it, there's a chance that her residency will be rejected.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why there's seemingly a very high rate of these being rejected now. There's been a spike in applications, unsurprisingly.
Because people are frightened, and you're quite right, and we must keep reminding people that well, I appreciate we're living in the age of unenlightenment, but most rational responses to this situation would say that your wife's probably going to be fine. But you want certainty. Yeah. What if you've got mortgages, you've got children, you want certainty. You at least want to know as much as you can for certain about what the future might hold. We all do.
Yeah, the other thing about these rules is, and it is worth stressing, they're completely different to the rules for non-EU nationals. Non-EU nationals can gain residency through marriage and being here for a certain length of time and nothing more. In the case of an EU residency application, my status, my earnings, are completely irrelevant. And a lot of the problems that other EU nationals are having is that they have stopped working because they're to look after children because their partners are supporting them, which people all over the country do. But
Conservatives encourage us to do.
Yeah, that causes a problem for this application. So my wife's not in that position because she's worked, but there's also a requirement that you need to have comprehensive medical insurance. And my wife, when she was pregnant with our daughter, had maternity allowance, not maternity pay, maternity allowance because of the amount she'd earned previously. But we're not clear on whether, in order to pass this application, she would have needed medical insurance at that point, despite not knowing.
Back then, I sense you could carry on providing us with expert testimony on this, but I want to move on. Before I do so, and I know this is a rhetorical question, because if you can answer this, I'll give you the money myself. If in the worst happened and your wife did have to leave this country, if many EU citizens were compelled to leave this country after negotiations are completed, what would happen to all the money she's paid in national insurance in order to protect herself and her family in the future in this country?
Well, it wouldn't. She wouldn't get the benefit of it, would she?
No. Leave it there, Jamie. You know how it works in. Come on, mate. You're a barrister. That was a real sort of shake your wig moment. Giuseppe is in Westminster. Giuseppe, what would you like to say?
Well, it's the same point, really. I've been here for 32 years. I came in to work for a bank at the beginning. Now I'm 63, and I have an English wife that I married about a year ago, and we have a child. Filing the form is just ridiculous. I have a reasonable education. I was graduating in engineering, and then I have an MBA. So I can do it, but the amount of, bureaucracy is just crazy. And, you're married and, 32 years, children here. I will have a grandchild in here. And, it should be just a short interview of 5 minutes at, City Hall or something like this, and it should be just done. I also have a permanent resident card that I got in 1993, valid until 1998, and it's absolutely beyond belief. What.
The hoops you have to jump. How worried are you though? You'll allow me to call you. You're a mature man. You're a wise man. Are you really worried?
No, I'm not.
Good.
I'm absolutely not worried about it. But I sympathize because I see that it's very difficult to get it done. And it's a system to basically make sure that they can say no as many times as they want, effectively. And it's a new regulation that was implemented recently, which I don't really. And
all of this could be avoided because the application for residency, you could, by all means, I would not like it, but we are where we are. You just stick a date on the statute book and say, right, and everybody living and working here before that date is fine. And now we're going to have different rules for coming in and out of the country, which are probably going to be pretty similar to what the rules were before, and we'll all be poorer, but, somebody somewhere will be able to smoke a cigar and say, we've got our country back. It's 10:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's important to be clear about this amendment that the House of Lords passed in a vote 2 nights ago. The government lost. The government are saying categorically and clearly that they must retain the right to kick all EU nationals out of this country. Now, we know that there are some people who want that to happen. Some very, very stupid, nasty people who, you saw the fella, didn't you? The photograph the morning after the referendum result came in, where he'd sort of looked like he'd left the barber's halfway through his haircut. He had one side of his head shaved and he was wearing a T-shirt that said something like, now chuck 'em out. We won, now chuck 'em out. I don't know anymore how tiny that minority is. I think I get exposed to an unrepresentative sample of that mindset, given the beauties of social media. But that is the only constituency who are going to cheer this. People who actually face the prospect of chucking out every EU national in the country with a degree of delight. I had some scales removed from my eyes in recent months, but I categorically refuse to believe that the average Leave voter wants to see anybody thrown out of this country, any law-abiding, tax-paying, contributing citizen chucked out of this country. I just don't believe it. The ones, my friends and family who voted to leave the European Union, are aghast. So the question then becomes, why are the government categorically and clearly stating that they want to retain the right to kick all EU nationals out of the country? To which the answer becomes, well, it's the only way they can protect the rights of British people living elsewhere in the European Union. 2 problems with that. Number one, Theresa May's just lectured Scotland on why politics isn't a game, and yet she's effectively saying these people are bargaining chips in a game of poker. So she's either not bright enough to realise the inconsistency in that rhetoric, or presuming that the public aren't bright enough to spot the problem, or both. That's problem number one. Problem number two is the people on the Remain side of the argument were so concerned with the welfare of British people working abroad that they voted to retain the status quo. So to turn around now and tell them that they are somehow less loyal to their compatriots in France and Spain and Germany is, even by the standards of 2016 and 2017, about as close to chuntering nuggetry as it's possible to get, without drowning in it. Madness. So why don't we just do the right thing? 034 560 60973. The problem perhaps will be pensioners in Spain, but I don't believe they're a drain on the Spanish economy. Oddly, it's almost as if people who voted to leave no longer believe the arguments that they used when they were campaigning to vote to leave. They need us more than we need them. It's all Project Fear. It's madness. Let's just, for once, park the politics and do what's morally right. Tell our friends. There's an Italian girl, goes to school with one of my daughters. Morning after the referendum result, am I going to have to go back to Italy? And we giggled and laughed and reassured her. Not sure I could do that now. Peter's in Bristol. Peter, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I do love your monologues, but they're not when they steal the points of the upcoming caller.
Do you know, it's probably, if you were on the other side of the argument, you'd now accuse me of getting Caroline to steal all your excellent points and then pass them off as my own before introducing you.
Absolutely. So I was just going to back up what you were saying. I watched Question Time last night and watched Liz Truss wriggling around the question of whether or not people were being used as bargaining chips. And she said it in all but the words that they were being used as bargaining chips. They're only bargaining chips if you're actually prepared to fulfil the opposite.
Exactly.
And I think we're asking politicians the wrong question, and I think we need to stare them in the eye, and instead of saying, are you going to let these people stay, we should be saying, are you going to turf them out?
Yeah, ever. Any circumstances whatsoever.
People back home.
Yeah.
And I think that's the question we should be asking.
So if we end up with 500,000 pensioners coming back from Spain with all manner of care and health concerns, and we respond to that by chucking out all the young people who don't have particular health concerns and pay tax that's going to provide the social care that these pensioners provide, that would be genius, wouldn't it? That'd be great.
It's madness, and I've just I'll say this. I've just finished a novel based on the back of Brexit, and every time I made something stupid up, something stupider happened. And this is another one. The idea that we send away productive people in case somebody decides that they're going to...
You've stolen my thunder. There you go. We're quits now, because I was about to say to you, you've just deployed logic and described with evidence and reason an absolutely unassailable point. But that doesn't mean that everyone's going to go with it, does it? Because look where we are, look how we've ended up where we are. I mean,
I just think we need to nail them to the ground and say, are you the person who's going to send them home?
Yeah. Who's going to do it? Also, how's it going to be done? You know, I mean, when there were suggestions that Donald Trump was going to employ the National Guard to chuck out illegal immigrants, and they knew what they were doing. It was discussed. It got out. It became, so it just moves the conversation slightly, and you end up with pundits and commentators. Thankfully, nobody in this country yet saying, well, maybe that's not such a bad idea. That would involve soldiers kicking indoors to drag crying children out of their beds and put them on buses. And I still, even my snowflake tendencies, I still refuse to believe that the majority of any population would want that to happen. Peter, thank you. Don't put that in your book, just in case it does happen. Jill's in Tame. Jill, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Jill.
I think the UK should give security to EU citizens living and working here. I think I voted Brexit, but we're not all sort of... We are altruistic as well, some of us, and especially listening to you this morning when you first started and to two of your first callers, I can see Europe as... I just saw this picture in front of me of this fine weave. It's so complex. Our lives are so entangled. And when
you've just taken a Stanley knife to it, Jill.
Well, thank you.
Well, I'm sorry, you have. Without realising, but you've just described precisely why extracting ourselves from the European Union will be a lot more problematical than the people who persuaded you to vote the way you did told you.
No, I stand by what I voted.
Of course you do.
I'm not quite clever enough, obviously, to argue with you on all the...
It's not cleverness, just knowledge.
But The world is like a weave, and I include the rest of the world like that. Our lives are entwined, and we have contributions arrangements with countries outside of Europe. So I think it can be unpicked, but we do need to do it sooner rather than later. But I do think on this issue that you're talking about this morning, I think that we really should do the right thing and give security to people living here.
Well, we've already told them. And I will no longer. I will park now my picking at your democratic decision. But we've already told the people you described that we don't want to be in the same big tent as them. So you can completely understand, I presume, why they're now worried that we're going to tell them we don't want them in the little tent either.
I'm happy to be a European. Always happy to be a European. I just have issues with. I didn't feel that the UK was best served by the way it was governed. That's how I felt.
I'm not going to drag you down the name the laws you didn't like route, because that wouldn't be fair. But be careful with that Stanley knife, Jill. All right.
Can I just say that altruism and knowledge? Not everybody that voted to remain was totally well informed and knew all the detail any more than people who voted Brexit.
No, but on the issue we're discussing today, they were simply right, weren't they? When you were told that this will put the future of these people into confusion, you chose not to believe that.
They happen to be right on this issue. There's many more issues, but we all have altruism and we all have knowledge, and not everybody on the Remain side, believe me.
You're quite right, and I'm glad that you've made that point, but I would ask you to put away the naked blade. Diana's in Fulham. Diana, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm the first-time caller, and I'm a bit nervous.
Well, don't be nervous, but do be clearer. Put your phone right by your mouth, because the phone line's gone a bit funny, Diana. What would you like to say?
Okay, I would like to say that I am Italian. I've been living in this country for 40 years. My husband came over for work 40 years ago. I've been working all my life. Recently, I've been ill, so I had to have lots of medical treatment. I still work, but I would like to say that I have lots of friends and lots of nieces and nephews that have been come to this country to work in the NHS as doctor, surgeon, and so on. And most of them are actually seriously worried about
their futures. The phone line's awful, so I'm just going to clarify. You're talking about friends and family in the medical profession who are now looking for jobs in other European Union countries.
Oh, yes.
So we're losing doctors and nurses potentially.
Yes, and then
while running the risk of inviting 500,000 pensioners back to Britain from Spain. Diana, I know it's your first time call, and I'm really sorry, but the quality of the phone line just isn't good enough. I'm glad you got your point across, and I hope you'll ring me again and maybe climb a tree before you do so the signal is a little bit stronger. Stefan is in Telford. Stefan, what would you like to say?
Hello there. I voted to leave.
Yeah.
And in the area that I live, it's in Telford, which is voted strongly for leave.
It was, wasn't it? It was a big leave vote in Telford, in that sort of corner of Shropshire.
It was, yeah. And at the time, I thought I was doing the right thing, because I was told these things like we could take our own laws back to Great Britain and that. And
yeah, of course.
Yeah, and it seems that when you look into it more closely, it's what laws are we taking back? And because we already, it's not like in Brussels that they decide our, like, for example, murder charges or anything like that. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. What you've done, I think what you're telling me, is that you kind of believed the headlines, and now you've read the story and realised that the headline probably was a little bit sensationalist or exaggerated.
Yeah, that's it. That's.
I think there's an awful lot of people like you, and I'm not sure that they've all got the courage and the intellectual confidence to admit what you've just admitted. How do you feel about the thing we're discussing today? The simple question of whether or not your neighbours in Telford, who were born in France but have lived here for 10, 15, 25 years, whatever it might be, just tell them they're staying. Your life is not going to change.
Yeah, I think they should definitely stay. I mean, they belong in this country just as much as any other British national and any other.
And yet we are where we are. And of course, people. I'm going to say something about Stefan that might take him by surprise. I am not the reason why newspapers like the Daily Mail are using words like treason and treachery to describe people like John Major and Tony Blair. John Major and Tony Blair are not the reason why newspapers like the Daily Mail are using words like treason and treachery and enemies of the people to describe High Court judges. People insisting on evidence and transparency, insisting that people who told lies are held to account for those lies. They're not the problem that the Daily Mail and others are worried about. They're worried about people like Stefan. They're worried about people who wake up to the fact that they've been conned. They're not that worried. They just want to shut down the people pointing out the con. Of course they do, because if they don't shut them down, what happens? That happens. And it happens on this programme every single time we touch on this topic. Because this is a safe space where people can be honest. Honesty is the enemy. Honesty. Hashtag fake news. But a very wise man on Twitter has written recently, if I'd known that I was living the first 45 years of my life in a period of unprecedented peace and stability, I would have got a lot more done. I'll leave you with that thought. James is in Cologne in Germany to talk to us about the expat, which is what you are from a British point of view, or the immigrant, which is what you are from a German point of view, experience. What can you tell us, James?
Hi there, James.
Hello,
First-time caller.
Very welcome.
So I've been living in Cologne, Germany now for over 12 years. I've got a German wife and a daughter, which has got dual nationality. So she's just coming up to 3 years old now. I'm looking to move back actually to the UK in 2 or 3 years, and like now I'm just in the position where I don't know what to do, if it's going to be possible, and I'm just, really scared that, potentially this could break the family up. And the hardest part about this is all my family actually voted to leave rather than remain.
Did you tell them that you feared uncertainty? Let's be charitable. That what did they do about did you have concerns prior to this happening? Did you see this down the railroad?
Well, I did have concerns. Of course, being married, it was kind of 50-50 how it would go if, being married would be enough. But reading the news now, week by week, it just seems that, the uncertainty there is growing. I did raise the concerns. However,
Because what I don't want to do is cast your family members as sort of chomping fools. Yeah. They were probably just quite trusting, and they just thought, no, you'll be all right. Because a mate of mine whose brother is a translator actually works for the European Union, and their mum was about to vote to leave, and he phoned her up and said, look, Mum, by all means vote however you want, but I don't know that I'll have a job if Britain votes to leave the European Union. And she went, I hadn't thought of that, son, and changed her vote accordingly. But so they weren't bad people that you're describing. They just, I don't know, just squinting a bit rather than having their eyes wide open.
Yeah, I just think, I don't know, just the way the world's going at the moment, it's just really worrying. Like, I don't know, to me, everyone's, turning, more racist by the day, if I'm being honest, and they're not looking at people as a person. They're just believing what they're reading, and not just giving people the benefit of the doubt and actually seeing the people as who they are and who they can be to Britain.
Do you see any wisdom in the idea that the reason why we can't afford people living here from European Union countries a degree more security is in case somewhere further down the line Angela Merkel tries to chuck you out of Germany?
Well, of course, there is also going to be uncertainty on that side. The only thing I can say is I've lived here happily for 12 years. However, there just comes to a point where you do want to move back home, where you come from. Again, there is uncertainty on both sides now. However, if it wasn't because of this Brexit, then, nothing would have changed and everything could have carried on, for me at least, the way it has been going.
And that's all been thrown up in the air. It's almost as if, and again, I'm kind of bending over, wasting my time trying to be charitable because no one ever notices, but it's important and it's the truth. It's sincere. It's as if the vote was cast in a slightly different universe from the one we inhabit. It was cast on a sort of, I don't know, almost like a game show type basis. It was almost a pantomime, and you chose a side and you booed or you cheered. And now, of course, we're realising that this is actually recasting the world in which we live in a way which yet we haven't seen any evidence of it being better than what it was like before, yet.
Yeah, exactly. And you've only got to think, with myself living in Germany, these are two countries which was previously at war with one another. The European Union has helped these countries put the differences behind each other. And, the whole European Union...
Well, that's the perfect example. That is the perfect example of what became known as Project Fear, because when people pointed out that a lot of the foundations of European Union, not the European Union even, but European Union and European cooperation, going back way before the common market was founded, going back to Churchill, the belief was among people like him that this would safeguard peace in our time, for want of a better phrase. This would safeguard peace in continental Europe. But when David Cameron just tried calmly to make that point, just to point out that the European Union has almost certainly played a role in the longest period of peace that continental Europe and the UK has ever seen, he was accused of saying if you vote to leave, World War III would start tomorrow. And it works, because I get exposed to this more than anybody. And you see it. Actual, normal, intelligent people with functioning intellect sending tweets and texts and messages saying, well, World War III hasn't started yet, so your lot were lying. No one said World War III would start. They just suggested that an instrument of government that engendered and fostered cooperation among countries that had previously been enemies probably played a part in them not being enemies anymore. And when you think things can't get any madder, Germany now has become the bulwark against fascism and far-right politics. Amazing. James, I wish you well. Again, I think we'll be fine, but, I probably thought that about lots of things over the course of the last 18 months that have turned out not to be fair. From James, who is married to a German, to Herman, who is a German. Hello, Herman. What would you like to say?
Hi, how are you?
Very well indeed. What's on your mind?
I don't know how aware are you of how the government actually moved the goalposts.
Go on.
Well, you know the European regulation about freedom of movement of 2004.
Yes.
It was made law by Parliament in November of last year. And it just entered into being legally binding on February this year.
I didn't know that.
Well, that is a fact.
Okay.
That is misleading each and every single EU immigrant in this country. Because since government did not implement that in 2004, many of us did not look for residence permits.
Because you just didn't think you'd need to?
Precisely.
Do you think that was deliberate, or just because with politics it's always difficult to know whether you're looking at incompetence or deliberate deception?
I'm an enemy of the people. I'm an economist.
Yes. Oh, God. We're blooming experts.
Yeah, we hate each other, Anyway, what do I think? I think it is a sloppy mistake in order to introduce the break in immigration. The problem is that becomes retrospective for all of us that do not have the permit.
Yes, and that is why the applications are rocketing and the uncertainty is becoming endemic. How do you feel? What is your status? How do you...
I am a stay-at-home dad. My British wife basically pays for me, okay?
Yes.
Fortunately, I have medical insurance.
Okay.
So on that front, I would be okay. But because I cannot use my wife's income in my application...
Do you have children?
I have two British
Of course
children.
you do. You said stay-at-home dad. It'd be a slightly weird description of yourself if you didn't have any children. There you go. Yes.
No, the funny part here is the illogical part of the law, because I am also Mexican.
Wow.
If I go through the motion of getting residence through my British wife as being a non-EEA national,
yes,
I would do it swiftly.
Oh, I see. But as an EU national, it's a higher hurdle to jump.
Yes, but hold on.
Go on,
I
quickly.
cannot do it because I would be illegally here, and they would reject me immediately.
If you were to apply your Mexican citizenship rather than your EU... crikey, Herman, I wish you well. I can tell from your voice that this is no laughing matter. This is your life that we're talking about. We often miss that. think Norman Tebbit missed it when he talked about, and he's the sort of patron saint of this rhetoric, saying people who voted to protect British people working abroad somehow care about them less than people who voted to throw them under a bus. And Norman Tebbit talked about concern for foreigners rather than British on that side of the argument. You have to dig out on Twitter I think she's a Czech woman who cared for Norman Tebbit's disabled wife and lived in their home.